BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode I will be talking about one new Zodiac killer suspect and revisiting some of the suspect profiles from the past. The first one that I would like to talk to you about is Gary Francis Post. Recently I did a two-part book discussion on Catching Zodiac by Dale Julin, and I also did an interview with Dale Julin, which you can hear on this channel. And Dale Julin believes that Gary Francis Post was the Zodiac killer. He was contacted by an individual named Chris Avery, who was actually homeless at the time, and he provided him with the information and a story about how Chris Avery believed that this individual named Gary Francis Post, a house painter from California, was indeed the Zodiac killer of the 1960s. And recently, I've been contacted by multiple people who knew both Chris Avery and Gary Francis Post in their personal lives, and again, not one person, multiple people who just absolutely dispute the narrative. They're saying this guy Chris Avery made the whole thing up, or that he is just confused and he's remembering things incorrectly, and he very much just provided false information to Dale Julin, which went on to become the source material for the book Catching Zodiac, as well as becoming the suspect of the Case Breakers, which is a group that has more or less endorsed Dale Julin's Zodiac theory. I'm going to keep you guys informed about any updates about that if I can get to the heart of the issue. We can find out who is telling the truth, because if you go back and you listen to my interview with Dale Julin as well as to my two-part book discussion on Catching Zodiac, you will hear that I said the strongest pieces of evidence in Dale's theory are the confessions, that multiple people claim that they've heard a confession from Gary Francis Post that he was the Zodiac killer. Gary Post was even taken into custody in his senior years, and then he's saying he figured it out, this Dale Julin guy figured it out, talking about being the Zodiac killer. And I said that those things are pure hearsay. It's not like we have some audio file or some video file of Gary Francis Post confessing to being the Zodiac killer, but Chris Avery claims that he heard Gary Post confess to being the Zodiac, and other people who knew Gary Post said that he confessed. And when you have these multiple confessions in different places, I said that's the strongest piece of evidence. But if it turns out that all of that is false, then it's back to square one. No, it's actually back to square zero. Possibly. As I said, I'll keep you guys informed. And if you want to follow along with all of these Zodiac killer discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. You can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. This allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And I also want to let you guys know that I'm still releasing chapters of the book Down the Dark Lane, 3 Thrillers from the Motel on the weekends. It's the audiobook version, and the link to the Amazon page for both my books, Killer on a White Horse and Down the Dark Lane, are still in the description box. But as the writer, I'm openly asking you not to read those versions because there are just too many imperfections in them. I think that the audiobook is coming out much more neatly, and I have released one of the midsection segments of Down the Dark Lane about halfway through that one, and there is a playlist for that. There's a complete version of Killer on a White Horse, all available here on Black Box Online Radio. Lots of content to explore, especially if you're an audiobook person. I'm a huge audiobook person. I absolutely love them. And in addition to that, I also am trying my best to release reels on Instagram and Facebook, as well as here on YouTube, on the YouTube Shorts page. So there's a lot of content going around on and for Black Box Online Radio, and you can also like the page on Facebook as well as the one on Instagram, BlackBoxNid88 over there. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is a new documentary that has been made available on Max, which is formerly known as HBO Max. I'm probably just going to call it HBO Max because that's just what's stuck in my memory. This is going to be exploring the suspect Jim Mordecai, who is a Zodiac killer suspect that I only found out about maybe 4 days ago. Now, I'm going to share with you guys some things from an article that was written by People magazine. It's a write-up for the HBO series, sorry, Max series. As I said, it's HBO Max. Let's just stay with that. And I'm going to share that article with you, but first I wanted to give you my understanding of the events. A woman believed that her grandfather, which is actually her step-grandfather, was a criminal who committed various sex crimes. And the research process that she got to the Zodiac was done in a very different way, because of course the Zodiac killer was not a sexual predator. The Zodiac was a serial killer that committed murders in 1968 and 69, the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the murder of Paul Stein. None of those were sex crimes. But her research process actually led her to think that her grandfather was a suspect in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. Now, those were sex crimes, and they also were, well, there was DNA that was left behind, semen DNA, and at least one of them, the murder of Kim Wendy Allen. And we aren't necessarily sure if all of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings were committed by one person. It's a very, very difficult case to follow, but I have some episodes about that here on this channel as well if you would like to check them out. So she starts investigating the possibility of her grandfather being the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer, and she's looking at other possible crimes that he may have committed or similar crimes in Northern California. And one of them was the Kathleen Johns abduction off of Highway Route 132 on March 22nd of 1970. This crime was claimed by the Zodiac killer. So then, Santa Rosa to the Kathleen Johns incident to the Zodiac murders, and ultimately, she's looking at the possibility of her grandfather, Jim Mordecai, being the Zodiac killer. And I, again, have to be honest with you, I only found out about her 4 days ago. Let's go to an article from People magazine that has a write-up for the show written by Nicole Acosta, just citing the source. A new 4-part docuseries premiering on Max follows one California woman's quest to uncover the truth about her deceased step-grandfather by confronting her traumatic past and the secrets that have plagued her family for generations. The Truth About Jim is from director Sky Borgman of Investigation Discovery and Imagine Documentaries, and it delves into how a 32-year-old woman named Sierra Barter, her mother Shannon Barter, and her grandmother Judy Mordecai bravely pursue the truth about a mystery that could change their lives forever. Was Jim Mordecai a notorious serial killer? All 4 episodes are available on HBO Max. In the San Francisco Bay Area, Mordecai was a respected teacher to most, but to others, including his family, he was a monster with a history of physical violence and sexual assault against women and girls. As Sierra embarks on the journey that includes meetings with private investigators and law enforcement, as well as interviews with extended family members, she begins to put together a horrifying image of the man that her step-grandfather was. People spoke with director Sky Borgman about how she ensured the family story was conveyed sensitively. I do feel that when you're telling a story like this, there's just a lot of care that needs to be taken and understanding and empathy brought to the storytelling and how this trauma is represented, says Borgman, who's best known for her work, on the 2017 Netflix docuseries Abduction in Plain Sight about Jan Broberg, who was a child who was abducted twice by the same man. Also, being very conscientious of the family and being aware of what things can be triggering and re-triggering, have open conversations about them. Borkin says that the message he hopes viewers will take away from the docuseries is the need of having open conversations. I'm going to jump over to a different article from Dexerto. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It might be Dexerto, Dexerto. This is the one that Michael Butterfield posted that has been shared around a lot. And this talks more or less about how, okay, this woman, Sierra Barter, has her grandfather's DNA, step-grandfather's DNA, and she submitted it to the police. And what I think the overall strongest impression from everyone has been that they don't really think there's much of a Zodiac lead, but could she have identified the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer? I mean, obviously the Zodiac was not a sexual predator, but some people insist to this day that they believe that the Zodiac and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer are one and the same. And the evidence for this is the Zodiac killer talked about how he was no longer going to commit his crimes the way that he did by announcing them to the public. He was going to make them look like routine robberies and accidents, and perhaps, maybe even, abductions. And if you can follow the theory, the Zodiac commits the murders in 1968 and 69. He's writing letters and cryptograms, and he's still going to be taunting the police even after October 11th of 1969, the final murder, the murder of Paul Stein. Then he abducts Kathleen Johns, and now he's completely changed his MO, and now he goes on to become the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer. Firstly, I don't believe the the abductor of Kathleen Johns, if the abduction actually happened, was the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer, because if we look at the abduction of Kathleen Johns, she's driving down Highway Route 132, and somebody's like, hey, your back wheel's wobbling. And he tries to help, but he's actually making it worse. He tries to drive away, and he says, oh, it looks like it's worse than I thought. And then he gets her into his car, and he's driving around with her for an extended period of time, and then ultimately she's able to escape and get away. And the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer seems like someone who was much more methodical and also much more vicious than the person in Kathleen Johns' story, such as stating that this is someone who not only was able to successfully murder the victims, but also sexually assault them, tie them up. One of them was even carried 100 yards away to a dump site. And, of course, the explanation that's always provided, well, that's because it was a younger, inexperienced killer. I mean, maybe, anything's possible, but as of now, I just think that, number one, the Zodiac and the Kathleen Johns abductor are different people, and number two, the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer and the abductor of Kathleen Johns are also different people, but I'm going to give you a spoiler because it's shared in this article from Dexter2, and that is that they didn't have a conclusion. One of the biggest complaints about this documentary on Jim Mordecai as a Zodiac Santa Rosa suspect is there was no conclusion. Alright, she has the DNA, they have DNA from the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, and it's more or less just going to leave people with a question, well, wait a second, did he actually do it? Was he actually the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer? I mean, they have the DNA and she has the DNA. What's the answer? And there is not one that is provided. So everybody was saying that it fell short, and I haven't watched it yet. I've just been reading these articles, but, they provided a spoiler. All right, in a murder mystery, well, was he the killer or not? Oh, well, we don't know. Or at the very least, they are not going to tell us whether or not they know. By they, I mean the authorities. So that's just where I'll leave it at for now, and I will look more into Jim Mordecai as a Zodiac killer suspect, but I'm definitely going to be kind of looking at him with a skeptical lens, if you can understand me. And on that note, I would like to get to your shoutouts from BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. Once again, if anyone can use that website to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anyone will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Thank you so much. And River Prawn Pottery. Hey, thanks guys for your regular and consistent support. Absolutely amazing. And we have another one from BuyMeACoffee.com. And there is no message from this one. It just says thrashmetalshow.com. And thrashmetalshow.com. I checked out the website too. I invite you guys to as well. And if you're a metalhead or just a fan of different types of music, thrashmetalshow.com is a place that you might want to visit. So thank you so much to everyone who left a donation or contribution, as well as just any type of support of any kind. And Batman66 is a regular supporter of this program, and he also recommended two books that I'm going to be exploring, and one of them is the book Titwillow by Judith Chapman, and I talked about it on a previous Zodiac Killer news report, and it's one that I, again, had to take some time to digest the material about a suspect, because Judith Chapman believes that the Zodiac Killer was a man named Peter Plant, and it is a familial connection, but not like the father-daughter or the step-granddaughter connection. This was her late husband. She believes that the Zodiac Killer was her late husband, Peter Plant. Plant is spelled Plante. And I decided to buy the book. I mean, on a previous Zodiac Killer news report, I talked to you guys about this suspect because I pulled up the free sample from Kindle and I just read through a handful of pages, and I felt somewhat unsatisfied. I mean, I'm curious what other people have to say. I wanted to know how exactly is she going to tie in this whole theory together? So I decided to purchase this book from Amazon.com, Titwillow by Judith Chapman. And I'm reading like 2 pages into it, and she says she is ultimately going to accuse Peter Plant of not only the Zodiac murders, but of 144 murders. In total. And I'm just thinking, wow, all right. I mean, talk about, the skeptical lens. Now I got to bring out my skeptic magnifying glass, skeptic microscope, and also just kind of like take a step back. And I just have such a strong resistance to these types of theories when someone is going to be accusing a person of committing 100 murders or 200 murders or 300 murders. And in the Zodiac world, these types of theories exist, and they come up all the time. In this one, it's 144 murders. And what a lot of people are just wondering is, now wait a second, did you just have a bad experience with this family member? And now you're trying to almost either distract yourself or perhaps trying to vilify this person in a terrible way because you just think that they're the scum of the earth, they're an absolute terrible person. So they now have ways to just make this person seem worse and worse and worse as part of some type of mental exercise that they are performing. And now I'm not saying that Judith Chapman did that, but I do wonder about these types of things. I don't know what is in anyone else's heart or mind other than my own, but I do have these types of doubts when someone's going to be accusing someone of 144 murders. But to get to the heart and soul of the issue, there is a man named Peter Plant who was 20 years old in 1968-69 for the duration of Zodiac activity. And that is, again, very, very young. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. We have even younger suspects out there. George Senda and Louis Myers were 17 years old. Joseph Paul Franklin was 18 years old. And I've talked about all of these guys on the channel before. I invite you to check out some of the episodes. George Senda is actually in the thumbnail for the first ever Zodiac Killer News Report. And the voice that Brian Hartnell heard at Lake Berryessa when he was talking to the Zodiac was estimated to have been from 20 to 30 years old. But the person that spoke to the dispatcher, Nancy Slover, was described as being somewhat older. And this is important because when I was reading Robert Graysmith's book, he shares a quotation from Nancy Slover where she heard the voice on the Jim Dunbar show from the person claiming to be the Zodiac, and she said, absolutely not, he sounds too immature, he sounds just almost like a weak teenager, paraphrasing, but that's the idea that she is trying to convey. So she would have been completely against the Zodiac just being 20 years old. And the thing that I shared on the most recent discussion that I had about the book Titwillow was that Peter Plant was a competitive gymnast. He went to San Jose State University, and he was 5 feet 9 inches tall. He weighed 165 pounds, and as a gymnast, he was in extreme athletic shape. He monitored his weight. That's what Judith Chapman says in the book, that he made sure not to bring his weight above 165 pounds the way that gymnasts do. And again, that is in complete contradiction to the witness sightings of the Zodiac, such as Mike Mageau, who was shot by the Zodiac on July 4th of 1969, said that he was estimated to have been 200 pounds, beefy but not overly fat. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard saw the Zodiac at Lake Berryessa, and even more so, they have the footprints of the killer at Lake Berryessa, and they estimated that he was 200 to 225 pounds, and they actually think that it's going to be closer to 220 pounds because, again, in Robert Graysmith's Zodiac, he talks about part of the forensic investigation, and that is that when the Zodiac's footprints were found by law enforcement, they had an officer who was around 200 pounds walk alongside them to try and estimate the weight, and the officer's footprints did not sink as deeply into the ground as the Zodiac, so they were estimating that 200 to 225 pounds, but perhaps maybe even closer to the 210, 220 range. That's also a strike against Peter Plant as a Zodiac suspect. But those are some of the things that I have shared with you in the past. Some new observations relate to the handwriting. And I have to give credit to Judith Chapman. There are certain letters that are written by Peter Plant that heavily resemble the Zodiac. So I hope you don't think that I'm just being completely dismissive or trying to put down her research or something like that. But, I mean, some of them do heavily resemble the Zodiac's letters. I'll give her credit for that. But she also did something really interesting where she shows a comparison between numbers that were written by the Zodiac and numbers that were written by Peter Plant. Some of them look very similar, and others look extremely different. When Peter Plant would write the number 3, he very frequently had a type of curl that was added to the bottom of 3. Like, how the number 3 has, like, almost 2 curved lines that come down? And he had a curl shape that's added to the bottom of his number 3s. And I don't see that in any of the Zodiac's letters and numbers. I mean, I don't see that when the Zodiac's writing out numbers like 37. That's just not present. So that's another strike against him. Now, here are some details about Peter Plant that are shared in the book Titwillow. And firstly, Peter Plant had schizophrenia. he was very aggressive. And Judith Chapman also says that he was definitely not the sad little man that some people think about. Like, some people have the idea that the Zodiac killer was just a recluse, a socially awkward reject, the kind of person that just works a solitary job and then goes home by himself and just sits alone in some type of studio apartment or maybe a single story house with a basement, and then he's just alone all the time. Peter Plant was described as the exact opposite. Judith Chapman says that he was the loudest person at a party. If you went to a party, then everybody would hear Peter Plant. He was also an extremely aggressive individual, the kind of person who once threw a guy through a window and told him that he was going to make him eat shit. And he was confrontational, he was abusive, and I can gather that this guy was indeed a criminal. I can gather that he was a thug, but that again is also something where I'm just not seeing how that necessarily ties to the Zodiac case. So, I mean, if anything, that shows that this person is more confrontational than the Zodiac, because that is absolutely, absolutely something that the Zodiac killer is not doing. He's not just squaring up with people and trying to beat them in a fistfight. The Zodiac is shooting people in cars and running away. The Zodiac is tying people up before he attacks them, and maybe he'll order some teenagers out of a car at Lake Herman Road, but absolutely, absolutely not trying to show off how tough he is. If anything, he's trying to show how he needs to maintain control of the situation. So these really are some quite different things about Peter Plant. Now, the strong points for Judith Chapman's suspect would be, number one, facial similarities to the composite sketch. I do give her that. And interestingly, she has a solution to the Z13 cipher where Peter Plant's middle initial was S, and it's just the same letters, Peter S. Plant, but they are scrambled. And I, again, will give her that. I mean, that's just as good as any of the other solutions, and I'll be talking to you guys about a different one in just a second. Solution to the Z13 cipher. But, that's a strong point for Judith Chapman. But I'm going to level with you guys and be extremely honest with you. I've rarely had the experience where I read 55 pages of somebody's Zodiac killer book, and I'm just thinking, this isn't going anywhere. And that's the experience that I had with Titwillow by Judith Chapman. And I was just so curious to read this book because I wanted to know how she was going to connect all of the dots and show how this person could have been the Zodiac killer. You give everybody a chance, right? And who would I have been to say that her theory was incorrect if I hadn't, gone through all of her information? Even though from reading just the sample I had my doubts, I just wanted to know more. And I got 55 pages into the book, and I'm just like, this is not making a case at all for this person to have been the Zodiac killer. He seems like he is someone who was too thin, too skinny, and, I mean, not exactly skinny, he was actually very muscular, the way a gymnast is, like lean muscle and so on. He also seems like he has a completely different type of personality. And these things, the positive points I said, really are just almost me being generous, because I gave some suspects, like Earl Van Best, a 1 out of 10 in terms of a rating, and I have to give her a little bit more credit than that. So as a suspect, Peter Plant gets a 3 out of 10 for the positive points that I've mentioned, and then the other points that I've said against. So overwhelmingly, the evidence is against him being the Zodiac killer. And I was even trying to keep reading the book because, again, she's talking about 144 murders. I was thinking, how is she going to present this story? And is there a possibility that he committed any of those crimes? And as I said, I got 55 pages in, and I just didn't think that it was going anywhere. And I'm not trying to put down anyone's research or not. I just think that it's just missing the mark. And that's my ultimate take on this Zodiac killer suspect, Peter Plant. But if anybody would like to read this for themselves, one more time, the book is called Titwillow by Judith Chapman. And right now, I would like to get to that new solution to the Z13 cipher, which I was talking to you guys about. And this one comes to us from Stefan Nyberg. Stefan Nyberg wrote a fascinating essay concerning the Zodiac's exorcist letter, which I not only discussed, but I also referenced during my interview with the experts on the Zodiac Killer channel. And this solution to the Z13 cipher Well, first I'll provide a little bit of introduction. This is the Zodiac Killer's smallest confirmed cipher. Now, there are other things like the Z5 that are unconfirmed. However, there are 13 symbols. It goes AEN. There's the Zodiac sign. There are 3 circle dates, and they're separated by the letters K and M. Now, there's a shape that somewhat resembles an anchor. It could be the sign of Aries. And then there are 3 letters N, A, and M. And Stefan proposed that the first step in solving the cipher is to rearrange with start and stop positions. And firstly, it's like taking the ending section, putting that above the middle section, and then putting the first section at the bottom. And then you can actually turn it upside down, and it says, "Want to know my name." And it's almost as if that symbol that I call the Aries or the anchor is an upside down letter T. And my name is, want know my name. And my immediate response was, well, Stefan, do you think that there would be an additional type of metric to use to make it into more of a solid English sentence, like, do you want to know my name? Want to know my name? You want to know my name? Something along those lines. And what Stefan said was that he had thought about that as well. However, he thought that the Zodiac may have just simply implied that it was going to be read that way. My name is, want to know my name. And what do you guys think about this solution to the Z13? I definitely think that it's better than some of them out there. And I also think that, there is perhaps some other possibilities that we can explore. I wouldn't certify this one immediately, but I really do appreciate the technique and thought that Stefan was using, because you have some letters from the English language, and you have some symbols that are absolutely not English, like the circled 8 or the Aries anchor. And why? Why on earth would this person do that? Why on earth would this person use these different types of symbols? Now, somebody like Judith Chapman would simply say that, well, it's a substitution cipher, and the solution is just scrambled. It's English letters, they're just scrambled out of order, Peter S. Plant. And Chad Burke, who is the author of Cracked and some other Zodiac publications, spent a lot of time on the Z13 cipher. I've interviewed Chad Burke, and our interview is here on this channel, and he has all types of different reasons and explanations talking about why there are these symbols. Maybe they're borrowed from different languages, like Arabic and Greek, and they have meanings in that way. And that's more discussed in his book, He Who Lives by the Code Dies by the Code. And with Stefan's, though, it's simple. It almost completely works. I do have that doubt about why there wouldn't be like the connecting pronouns and the prepositions. You want to know my name? I think that would be much more solid, but I mean, this is pretty good, and I will give him that. What do you think about this solution to the Z13 cipher? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. Perhaps I gave up on the book Titwillow a little bit early, but I don't know about you guys, however, I get very curious about these different types of Zodiac Killer books, and already I'm thinking, should I give this one a chance? And it's called Zodiac Settling the Score. And this is one that, again, giving away some of the allure and mystery behind the book. If you read some descriptions of it, it'll say that it's exploring a comparison between the Zodiac and another serial killer, and the serial killer is going to be BTK, Dennis Rader. And the reason why I'm curious about this book is I put Dennis Rader in the Zodiac Killer Debunked series when I was talking about suspects that I thought were absolutely not the Zodiac Killer, or at the very least there was a low chance that they were the Zodiac. And BTK absolutely is on the lower end. And the reason why is that a lot of the points that I brought up in the debunking episode were mentioned in an interview with author Kimberly McGath, and she is more or less wanting to talk about how there could be possibilities that Dennis Rader left Japan, where he was stationed in the Air Force, and came back to San Francisco to become the Zodiac Killer. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. And again, this is a very vicious serial killer, very confrontational, but also BTK's first crime was the Otero quadruple homicide. And a lot of you guys have said this, even in the comments section. I've even thought about this. It just seems like such a complicated murder for someone to commit on his first try, that he murdered 4 people, and we're talking about a husband and wife and kids. It just seems like a very, very intricate murder for someone who has never killed anyone before. So that leads people to think that BTK committed murders before the bind, torture, kill persona was created. BTK also wrote letters and made up codes. He also was somebody who taunted the police. He was someone who tied up the victims, and the Zodiac Killer was someone who tied up the victims. The reasons why I put him in the debunking series are primarily related to his whereabouts, and BTK's family has openly disputed this by saying that he was not the Zodiac Killer. His daughter appeared on the podcast, The First Degree, just said, oh yeah, by the way, anybody out there who's reading about this Zodiac Killer BTK connection, it's absolutely false. During the entirety of Zodiac activity, he was stationed in Japan. And, oh, I used to know this one completely solid. Is it like from December of, is it from January of 1968 to the summer of 1968, he's stationed at Kadena Air Base in Japan, and then from the summer of 68 all the way to 1970, he is stationed at Tachikawa Air Force Base in Japan. So that's the entirety of Zodiac activity. The Zodiac's first crime, December 20th of 1968, and the final crime, October 11th of 1969. For all of that time, he would have been in Japan. And I want to know, how is this person, Kimberly McGath, going to present the narrative? How is she going to provide explanations for this? And I even thought about it. Now, could somebody get on a plane, fly over to the United States, commit the murders, and then fly back to Japan? Well, here's what people encounter when they start pushing a theory like this. Here's the problem, and that is, the Zodiac didn't only commit murders, he also mailed the letters from Northern California. This guy's regularly serving time on the military base in Japan or something. Was he on leave, or was he having somebody else mail the letters for him? Was he using some type of twisted mail courier forwarding service? Those things have been brought up in the past. So part of me wants to read this book and talk to you guys about it on the Zodiac Killer News Report, and the other part of me simply wants to say, now, I just spent money on a Zodiac book that I found to be very disappointing, and it doesn't mean that the all the stories that Judith Chapman was telling in her book, Titwillow, are worthless. I mean, I might pick it up again at some point, but when I'm reading a Zodiac Killer book, I want to know how they're going to get to the heart and soul of their Zodiac theory. And they're all of these, personal anecdotes about this is the way that Peter Plant grew up, and this is the way that Judith Chapman learned about things about him. This is how she met him. Okay, maybe we can explore that at a different time, but just getting to the heart and soul of the Zodiac theory in that book, it didn't really sell that well for me. And I definitely don't think she made a convincing case that her suspect was the Zodiac. So do I want to put money down again to read somebody's book, Zodiac Settling the Score, looking at BTK as the Zodiac Killer, when I think that there's such a low chance? I'll probably do it anyway. Why? Because curiosity killed the cat, right? Well, I mean, cats also have 9 lives, so that's most likely what I'll end up doing, because I want answers to those types of questions. I want to know how this theorist is thinking. And as you guys see, that this is the return of the Zodiac Killer News Report, because I polled you guys, and I was asking what type of episodes you like to listen to on Zodiac Monday. And do you want to hear more interviews? Do you want to hear more book discussions? Do you want the on-camera book discussions? And you guys voted, and the majority of people said that they wanted Zodiac Killer News Reports. And I thought there was a very interesting comment that somebody left when they said that you might as well do the Zodiac Killer News Reports, because the interviews that you have done have not lived up to the interviews that you did on the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Experts series. And I mostly do agree with that, but one of the things that I was actually looking forward to is talking to people who are not somewhat famous experts about the case. Now, that show was Interview with the Experts, is available on the Zodiac Killer channel. 2 episodes have come out recently in the last 6 months, and the rest of them are from 2021. But I was thinking that on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, I can talk to anybody. If someone has observations about the case, they're welcome to come on the show, and we can have a discussion. And you don't have to have the brand of being an expert. And it would be very similar to just having a call-in talk show, which maybe if I'm able to not only put that out there, but to actually do that well and actually have some type of acceptable finished product at the end of it. We're talking about all types of issues, why a call-in talk show would be more complicated, but it's roughly the same. Anybody could call in and they can share their ideas about not only the Zodiac case, but other true crime cases. And I just wanted to have different points of view, different types of people, and not have that type of limitation, because it really becomes quite difficult to say, well, now, is this person truly an expert or not? And a lot of people disputed some of the guests and their ability to live up to that name. But on Black Box Online Radio, anybody would be able to come on and just share what they think. Somebody like Judith Chapman or Kimberly McGath, the people who have written the books that I've talked about, Titwillow and Zodiac Settling the Score, respectively. But I am glad to talk about Zodiac news because there are so many things that are happening. As you see, new pieces of media about the Zodiac killer case are coming out all the time. The HBO Max documentary series. New suspects, whom I had never heard of before, are being mentioned all the time. Jim Mordecai, somebody that I learned about 4 days ago. And I didn't learn about Peter Plant until somebody recommended Judith Chapman's book to me. So it's just really endless. And I said this back in 2019, that there are, 2,500... maybe 3,000 suspects. If I were to do one episode on a suspect every day for a year, that's only 365 episodes, and that was 5 years ago, so I still wouldn't be done with the suspect list. And somebody asked me this on a live stream. How many of those suspects do you think have been discussed in the general public or discussed in true crime circles? Meaning, okay, the law enforcement might have a list of 2,500 suspects, but how many are actually discussed in conversations and discussions like this and in the comment section here on Black Box Online Radio? And I was estimating 900, 1,000, maybe more than that, maybe 1,500. And I really think that all the time we encounter suspects whom we wouldn't expect to find in all types of different places. But also, you can share anything you want about future ideas for the Zodiac Killer News Report, as well as future guests to have on the program. And in the past, I used to do Zodiac Monday as the Zodiac plus True Crime Talk. And I just have some very quick things to go through about some of the other cases. I'm trying to release YouTube shorts every day here on Black Box Online Radio, as well as on Facebook and Instagram. And I did 2 shorts about the story of Susan Wright, and she was a murderer who was known as the Blue-Eyed Butcher. And I had recently learned about her. I recently learned her name, actually, because I had talked about her on Black Box Online Radio before, but I just referred to her as the woman who stabbed her husband to death. Then she tucked her son into bed, then went back to her husband's room and continued to stab him. And she's the subject of the movie Blue-Eyed Butcher, and that's also the name that has been attributed to her. At first, I absolutely did not like the name because it sounded like a story of a woman who was just a victim of abuse, who ultimately retaliated and just lost it one night. But going through the true crime videos as well as the movie, it really became apparent that she was an abused woman, and she was in a very bad situation. But what she did was she concocted a revenge plot, and she decided to murder her husband, take his money, and then bury him in the backyard. Instead of using the channels and resources that were available to help her, she decided to murder him. And I think it was a pure revenge murder. And it was Batman66 who responded to my reel by saying that she stabbed him 193 times. 192, maybe I could get, but 193? Dr. Watson, this was no accident. No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. And the reason why I'm talking to you about this now is this is a very clear example of how someone can unleash ferocity when we least expect it. For example, with the Snoozy and Furlong murders, which some people think were committed by the Zodiac killer, one of the victims was stabbed 100 times, another victim was stabbed 200 times. These types of stabbings happen very frequently, where victims are stabbed excessively. And I often bring up the murder of George Chun, who was the final stabbing victim of Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista shooter. In addition to committing the mass shooting, Elliot Rodger stabbed his 3 roommates to death, and George Chun was the 3rd roommate that he stabbed. He stabbed him 93 times, less than 100, but still very, very excessive. And the Zodiac killer tied up the victims at Lake Berryessa, and he stabbed Brian Hartnell 6 times, and Cecilia Shepard was stabbed 10 times, 24 if you count the superficial lacerations. And I'm just not seeing this type of overkill, this type of viciousness, and this type of ferocity. And it relates back to all of the suspects that we've been talking about in this episode: Jim Mordecai, Peter Plant, BTK. All of these people seem to like they were more confrontational with the Zodiac. They seem like the types of people that would have gone for overkill, or at the very least, more torture. Bind, torture, kill. The Zodiac was not a torturer. Strike against BTK. Peter Plant, as I said, beat some guy up, threw him through a window, told him he was going to make him eat feces. Way more physical and aggressive than the Zodiac killer. Jim Mordecai, sexual predator, abuser, all of that stuff is not present when the Zodiac had multiple opportunities to sexually assault Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, and he chose not to. Strike against him as well. That's just what I'm seeing. I'm seeing very different types of behavior from all of the suspects that have been mentioned in this episode. Okay, so thank you so much for listening to this Zodiac Killer News Report, plus the true crime talk at the end. And one more time, if you have any ideas for the show, you can put them in the comments section down below. For longer things, you can send them to me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. BlackBoxNet88 over on Instagram. And as I said, please look out for the audiobook segments that are going to be coming out on the weekends. And once Down the Dark Lane is finished, I will be releasing the audiobook for the 3rd installment in the White Horse Killer saga. That will be called White Horse Strong. That will be coming out this year, 2024. And for now, goodbye.